Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I'm writing this from a motel room 300 miles from Halford University, and I don't know if anyone will believe what I'm about to describe. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physicist or a theorist or anyone qualified to explain what happened in that basement laboratory. I'm just a technician, a man who spent 7 years maintaining equipment and calibrating instruments, while brilliant people pursued ideas I could barely comprehend. But I was there when the experiment worked. I saw what came after. And I need someone to understand what we did, what we woke up, and what might still be coming through the door we opened. My name is Owen Marsh. I'm 32 years old, and until 3 days ago, I worked as a senior laboratory technician in the physics department at Halford University. It was a good job, steady and interesting enough to keep me engaged without requiring me to understand the deeper theories behind the research I supported. I knew the equipment better than most of the professors who used it. I could troubleshoot problems they couldn't diagnose, maintain systems they didn't know how to service, keep everything running smoothly while they chased their Nobel Prizes and published their papers. The physics department occupied an aging brick building on the eastern edge of campus, one of those mid-century structures that universities can't afford to replace and can't quite bring themselves to renovate. The basement housed the more sensitive experimental equipment, isolated from the vibrations of foot traffic and the electromagnetic interference of the building's outdated wiring. I spent most of my working hours down there, surrounded by humming machines and blinking indicators, making sure everything performed within specifications. I'd seen dozens of experiments come and go over my years in the department. Most of them produced results that meant nothing to me, but everything to the researchers. Data points that confirmed theories or raised new questions, incremental progress toward understanding things that most people would never think about. The work was usually mundane from my perspective. Calibrate the sensors, check the power supplies, document any anomalies, clean up when they were done. I was the invisible support system that kept the science moving forward. Then Dr. Victor Hess started his dimensional detection project, and everything changed. Dr. Hess had been working on his theory for nearly a decade before I joined the department, but it took him years to secure funding and develop equipment sensitive enough to test his ideas. The basic concept, as he explained it to me once, was that our reality wasn't the only one. Other dimensions existed parallel to our own, separated by barriers so thin they were essentially invisible, but so strong that nothing could cross them. These other planes of existence overlapped with ours like pages in a book, close enough to touch if you knew where to reach. His experiment was designed to send a signal through that barrier, to prove that something existed on the other side by detecting a response. It was purely theoretical physics, made practical, years of mathematics translated into actual equipment that I helped him build and maintain. The field generators, the sensors, the custom software that analyzed incoming data for patterns that matched his predictions. I understood the machines even if I didn't understand the theory behind them. For 2 years, the experiments failed. Signal after signal, sent into the void between dimensions, and nothing came back. Dr. Hess refined his approach with each failure, adjusted his parameters, redesigned his equipment. His team of 3 graduate students shared his determination, working late nights and weekends, convinced that success was just one more adjustment away. I admired their dedication even as I wondered if they were chasing something that didn't exist. The universe doesn't always cooperate with human theories, no matter how elegant the mathematics. But Dr. Hess never wavered, never doubted, never considered that he might be wrong. On a Thursday evening in late October, he announced that he was ready for what he called the definitive test. Everything had been optimized. Every variable had been accounted for. If the theory was correct, tonight would prove it. I helped the team set up for the experiment that evening, running final checks on the equipment, while Dr. Hess paced the basement laboratory with barely contained excitement. His graduate students, 2 young men and a woman whose names I should remember but can't seem to hold in my mind anymore, shared his anticipation, though I noticed nervous energy beneath their enthusiasm. They'd invested years in this project too. Tonight would vindicate them or send them back to the beginning. The basement lab was sealed against interference, the equipment calibrated to tolerances that pushed the limits of what was technically possible. Banks of monitors displayed readouts I'd learned to interpret over months of failed experiments. Everything was ready. The experiment began at 9 in the evening, when campus activity was minimal and electromagnetic background noise was at its lowest. I monitored the equipment while Dr. Hess controlled the main systems, his fingers moving across keyboards with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The field generators hummed to life, filling the room with a sound that was felt as much as heard. Energy patterns designed to resonate with theoretical dimensional barriers propagated outward from our equipment, signals sent into a void that might or might not contain anything capable of responding. For long minutes, nothing happened. The sensors showed nominal readings, no response to the signal being transmitted. I watched Dr. Hess's face shift from confidence to concern to determination as he adjusted parameters, increased power levels, refined the frequency of the transmission. His students exchanged glances but said nothing, trusting their mentor to find the right combination. Then something changed. It started as a flicker on one of the sensor displays, a reading that shouldn't have been possible given the equipment's configuration. I called it out, and Dr. Hess's eyes went wide. More readings followed, cascading across the monitors, data streaming in from directions the instruments couldn't locate. Something was responding to our signal. Dr. Hess was elated, practically shouting as he called out the readings to his students, documenting everything with the fervor of a man watching his life's work vindicated. The response grew stronger with each passing second, more defined, more structured. We were detecting something on the other side of the barrier, proving that other dimensions existed, making history in a basement laboratory, while the rest of the campus slept unaware. But I noticed something the researchers didn't, something that made my skin crawl even as they celebrated around me. The readings weren't just responding to our signal, they were probing it, analyzing it. The patterns coming back had structure that went beyond simple reflection or echo. There was something deliberate about them, something that looked almost like intent. Before I could voice my concern, the response intensified dramatically. The equipment began behaving in ways I'd never seen, readings spiking far beyond expected parameters, gauges redlining across every monitor. Lights flickered throughout the basement, the fluorescent tubes buzzing and dimming in patterns that had nothing to do with the building's electrical system. The air itself seemed to thicken, to become harder to breathe, as if pressure were building in the sealed room. Dr. Hess tried to maintain control, his fingers flying across the keyboards, but the experiment had taken on a life of its own. The response from the other side was overwhelming now, pushing against our instruments with force the equipment was never designed to handle. I could hear components straining, capacitors whining, the field generators producing harmonics that set my teeth on edge. And beneath all of it, I felt something I couldn't explain, a pressure in my skull that had nothing to do with the sounds in the room, a sensation of being watched, observed, examined by something I couldn't see, something vast and patient and suddenly terribly aware that we existed. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The equipment went dead, every display going dark simultaneously. The lights stabilized. Silence fell over the basement like a held breath. We stood in the dim emergency lighting, surrounded by the smell of overheated electronics, trying to process what had just happened. Dr. Hess broke the silence first, his voice shaking with what he insisted was excitement rather than fear. The experiment had worked. We had made contact with another dimension, received a response that proved his theory correct. This was the most significant discovery in the history of physics, he said. Everything would change now. But I couldn't share his enthusiasm. The basement felt different somehow, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. Something had shifted in the fabric of the room itself, in the relationship between this space and whatever lay beyond the barrier we had touched. I tried to articulate my concerns, tried to explain the wrongness I felt in my bones, but the researchers dismissed me. I was a technician, not a physicist. I didn't understand the implications of what we'd achieved. The readings would be analyzed, the data would be verified, and the world would learn that we weren't alone in the cosmos, that other dimensions existed and could be contacted. I went home that night with a feeling of dread I couldn't shake, a certainty that we had done something terrible, even if I couldn't explain exactly what. The days that followed proved me right. Strange things began happening in the physics building almost immediately. Equipment malfunctioned in ways that defied explanation. Sensors detecting signals with no source. Computers running programs that no one had initiated. Instruments recording data when they should have been powered down. The anomalies clustered around the basement laboratory, around the equipment we had used for the experiment, but they were spreading. People began reporting that they felt watched when working alone in the building, uncomfortable, reluctant to stay late or enter rooms that had never bothered them before. 2 graduate students quit the program without explanation within a week of the experiment, refusing to discuss what had driven them away. Dr. Hess dismissed all of it as psychological effects, the natural result of excitement and stress following a major breakthrough. We were all keyed up, he said, all imagining things because we were processing something unprecedented. The equipment malfunctions were coincidental. the result of pushing our instruments beyond their design limits during the experiment. There was nothing to worry about. But I saw the fear growing behind his eyes even as he denied it. I saw him flinch at shadows, hesitate before entering the basement, check over his shoulder when he thought no one was watching. I started keeping a log of every anomaly, every unexplained event, every report from staff and students who sensed something wrong in the building. The pattern was undeniable when you laid it all out. Something was happening here, something that centered on our experiment and was growing stronger with each passing day. I went back through the data from that night, analyzing the readings we had received with fresh eyes. I'm not a physicist, but I understand patterns. I understand when something has structure, when randomness gives way to organization, when noise becomes signal. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. The response we received wasn't random. It wasn't the simple echo of our signal bouncing off a dimensional barrier. It had structure that suggested intelligence, patterns that suggested purpose. We hadn't just detected another dimension. We had contacted something that lived there, something that was now aware of us. And our signal hadn't just established communication. It had given away our location. We had sent a beacon into the void between realities, and something had used that beacon to find us. I took my findings to Dr. Hess, demanding that we shut down the equipment permanently, that we destroy anything that might allow the experiment to be repeated. He refused. This was his life's work, his legacy, his chance at the recognition he had spent decades pursuing. He couldn't throw it away because a technician had gotten spooked by some anomalous readings. But his hands shook as he argued with me, and his voice cracked on words he tried to deliver with conviction. He knew something was wrong. He just couldn't admit it, couldn't accept that his triumph might be something far darker than he had imagined. That night, I was working late in the building when the basement equipment powered up on its own. I heard it first, the hum of the field generators cycling through their startup sequence, a sound I knew as well as my own heartbeat. I was 2 floors up, organizing supply closets, and the sound reached me through the building's old bones like a summons I couldn't ignore. I ran down to the basement and found the laboratory lit up, every monitor active, every system running. No one had initiated the startup sequence. No one was in the control room. The door had been locked when I passed it earlier in the evening. The experiment was running itself, or something else was running it. I tried to shut it down, but the controls didn't respond. I killed power at the breaker panel, but the equipment continued to operate, drawing energy from somewhere I couldn't identify. On the monitors, new data appeared. Not a response this time, but an outgoing transmission. Something was using our equipment to send a signal back to wherever the response had come from. It was calling to the other side, guiding something, showing it how to find the weakness we had created in the barrier between dimensions. I found the main power conduit and severed it with a fire axe from the hallway emergency station. The equipment finally died, monitors going dark, generators spinning down into silence. But the damage may already have been done. The signal had been transmitting for God knows how long before I noticed, marking our location, widening the path. The anomalies intensified after that night, spreading beyond the basement into other parts of the building. Lights failed and didn't come back. Cold seeped through walls in places it shouldn't have been able to reach. Shadows moved when nothing was there to cast them. Pools of darkness that seemed deeper than mere absence of light. Something was pressing against the barrier we had weakened, testing it, probing for a way through. I found Dr. Hess in the basement at 3 in the morning, surrounded by equipment he had somehow gotten running again, trying desperately to establish communication with whatever was on the other side. He thought he could negotiate, could convince it to leave us alone, could undo what we had done through dialogue and reason. The monitors showed responses to his transmissions, patterns that might have been language, might have been something else entirely. But whatever Dr. Hess was asking, whatever pleas or arguments he was making, the answer was clearly no. I pulled him away from the equipment and forced him to look at what was happening around us. The basement was changing. The walls seemed further away than they should have been. The shadows had depth that shadows shouldn't have. And in the corners of the room, at the edges of perception, something was taking shape. The barrier between dimensions was weakening, not somewhere far away, but right here. Our experiment had created a flaw in the wall between realities, and something was exploiting that flaw, widening it, preparing to come through. Dr. Hess finally broke down and admitted the truth. He had known the risks. He had suspected what might happen if the experiment succeeded. But his ambition had been stronger than his caution, his desire for recognition more powerful than his fear of consequences. He had wanted to be the one who proved other dimensions existed, whatever the cost. Now the cost was becoming clear. I made the decision to destroy the equipment that night, to remove any possibility of it being used again. I gathered what I needed: tools, accelerants, the determination to finish what had been started. But when I reached the basement, I found I was not alone. The shadows had substance now, almost solid, moving with purpose around the edges of the room. And at the center, where the equipment sat humming with power nobody had provided, something was forming, not fully present, not yet, but more real than it had been an hour before, a shape pressing through from somewhere else, using the weakness we had created as a doorway. I didn't see it clearly. My mind refused to process what my eyes reported. I caught only impressions. Vastness compressed into too small a space, geometry that hurt to perceive, awareness older than worlds, looking out from angles that didn't exist in normal reality. It wasn't fully here. It couldn't be fully here, not yet. The barrier still held, barely, enough to keep most of it on the other side. But it saw me. It knew me. It understood that I was one of the ones who had called out, who had sent the signal that drew its attention, who had shown it that something existed on this side of the wall it had been pressing against for longer than I could imagine. And it was grateful in its way, grateful for the invitation we had extended, grateful for the door we had opened. I ran. There was nothing else I could do. Whatever I had planned to destroy, it was too late for that now. The weakness existed, whether the machines did or not. Something had found the crack we made, and it was widening that crack with every passing moment. I fled the building as reality bent around me, as the barrier continued to thin. Behind me, the physics building stood dark and silent against the night sky, but it wasn't empty anymore. Something was there now, something that hadn't been there before the experiment, something that would continue to grow stronger as it learned how to exist in a world it had never touched before. I drove through the night without stopping, putting as many miles as I could between myself and Halford University. I don't know if distance matters. I don't know if anything can protect against what we've unleashed. I'm writing this from a motel room that feels too small and too exposed, watching shadows that seem darker than they should be, listening for sounds that don't belong. I don't know if the barrier will hold. I don't know if the thing we contacted will find a way through completely. I don't know if what's happening in that basement will spread, will grow, will eventually touch the rest of the world. All I know is that the experiment worked. Dr. Hess proved that other dimensions exist, that something lives in the spaces between realities. He got the discovery he spent his life pursuing. But the thing we discovered isn't just a phenomenon to be studied, isn't just data to be analyzed and published. It's aware, it's intelligent, and it's been waiting on the other side of a barrier that we just taught it to break through. The experiment worked. Now it knows we exist. And somewhere in a basement 300 miles from here, something is still pressing against the door we opened, still learning how to make itself real in a world that was never meant to contain it. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed from only one side. We open the door, and we have no idea what's about to walk through it.